4 months, 2 weeks, and 6 days. That's how long the protests have been going on in Hong Kong as we record this on Tuesday, August 20th, 2019. It's an incredible thing to see. I don't think it's been getting quite the attention it deserves. But the real angle on this isn't just the ongoing desire for liberty among the people of Hong Kong who enjoyed 99 years of fairly enlightened British rule, but the squeeze that it's putting on the communists who still run Beijing. Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. This is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Bill, I want to start with you. Lee Wan, in a piece, I think it was for the Wall Street Journal, though I forgot to write this down, had what I thought was the most interesting angle on Beijing's reaction to the protests so far. You've seen the riot police, the military massing on the sort of intra-Chinese border between I guess it's Kowloon and the mainland and Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But what he calls China's soft power fail, and I think this is really key to why the protests are ongoing. So bear with me. This is a quote from his opinion piece. He wrote, "As protests continue to roil Hong Kong streets, China's state-led propaganda machine has gone into overdrive to persuade the world that radical Hong Kong protesters have put the city in peril. Through social media and other digital arenas, English language messages from China have painted a picture of a tiny minority." Have you seen the video? Yeah, it's not a tiny minority. Foreign-influenced ruffians intimidating a silent majority of law and order residents who, clearly love the commies in Beijing, right? These efforts have largely failed, Wan writes. They took a further blow on Monday when Facebook and Twitter removed hundreds of accounts they said appeared to be state-backed efforts to sow misinformation and discord. Let me just cut right to the chase, Bill, and give you the big question. Why do communists, or I guess I should say authoritarians, suck at this soft power thing so badly?
Did you just say that Facebook pulled down accounts
and
opened
Twitter
by the communist Chinese government?
Yes.
I thought they liked that kind of thing.
Apparently they didn't like the bad press they were getting.
Well, that's a stop clock moment for today.
Isn't that nice?
Yet another.
And Twitter, too.
The most important thing about the protests in Hong Kong, I think, really just have to do with comparing them to protests in America. This is a true story. Just last Sunday night, I was MC of an event where they made a bunch of calls, tried to cancel the event, and said there would be protesters there and that they'd be blocking the entrance and so on. And the protesters were supposed to gather at 4, and I got there around 4:15, 4:30. And there was no one there. Likely they overslept. But that's really the point, isn't it? I mean, I mean it. I think they didn't do it because either they overslept or because they had, just maybe they were busy that day. I don't know. But my point is that protesting in the United States, statistically, in terms of activities in the world, is probably one of the safest things that you can do. It's probably one of the safest jobs in the world.
Yes.
If you're a protester in America. Really, it truly is. It's far less dangerous than working on an oil rig or in a coal mine or on an aircraft carrier. It's really pretty much walk down the street and, pat yourself on the back. It's not the same way in China. And even though Tiananmen Square was 20 years ago.
30.
30 years
Yeah.
ago. Good Lord.
Right.
30 years ago. There are real consequences to that, and so what they're doing is they're risking their lives for this because the Chinese government has limits beyond which they will not go, and beyond which publicity will not affect them. And if they genuinely feel like they're losing control of the situation, they'll open fire, and that'll mean the end of you and the only young life you have. And of all the things that I came down on this issue about a week ago in a Bill Whittle Now episode where I said, well, it's Chinese sovereignty, to some degree they have. It's like California saying they had, we're breaking away, and I didn't feel comfortable with how I ended up leaving that because it made me feel like I've ended it without the sympathy for the protesters. I have enormous sympathy for the protesters. The protesters are people who grew up in a Western civilization. Or at least are the children of people who grew up in a Western civilization. Hong Kong was a British colony, and it was run by British rules. And the governor of Hong Kong specifically, whose name I should have absolutely memorized, but I'm embarrassed to say I do
The
not.
first post-war governor, I know who you mean, and it escapes me too. Sorry.
He was the guy who basically said, okay, we've got laws against murder and rape and arson and so on. That's it. If you want to go out and start a business, start a business. If you want, we're going to keep taxes low or to nothing. And he basically made Hong Kong a laboratory for absolute free market capitalism. And Hong Kong, with zero national resources, became an economic powerhouse because people worked hard there and they were allowed to keep their money. And this is what Hong Kong has always had that's separate from China. If you look at the history of China since it absorbed Hong Kong in 1999, you realize that China didn't absorb Hong Kong. Hong Kong absorbed China. Hong Kong business practices are what led China to their explosive growth in their economy. So Hong Kong's individual identity has worked really well for Hong Kong. And if the Chinese are thinking that they can squeeze more out of them or make them obey, we get to the question which you asked, and I've been dancing around for 10 minutes on. Power requires the willingness, real power is essentially based on fear. Totalitarian states that can enforce their will on the people, in order for them to be able to do this, they have to first generate a climate of fear. And that climate has to be well established before people will simply do what they're expected to do and run in terror when you bring out the SS or the Gestapo or the NKVD or the KGB or whatever you want to call them. And China has not imposed that degree of fear on the Hong Kong people. And it sounds to me that the Hong Kong citizens are determined to make sure that it doesn't get to that level of fear. Because the ability of a totalitarian state, as you asked, to maintain power is not ever through soft power. It has no soft power. The fact that it's a totalitarian regime means it has no soft power. It's all stick and no carrot. And if you're going to be all stick and no carrot, you better be prepared to use the stick. And you better have everybody realize what happens to you if they use the stick. And I think this is what the Hong Kong protests are about. They're saying, "Don't wave a stick at us. We're not going to stand for you waving a stick in our face." And on that score, they are so far ahead of history, and the endless repetition of the same patterns. The idea that we're going to fight now, before we're too terrified to fight, is just it's just exemplary. And finally, I'll just say this to the protesters in America and people like Colin Kaepernick. The people who are singing the Star-Spangled Banner standing up are people who are willing to take a bullet between the eyes for what they believe in. You know, they don't get $1 million endorsements out of this. This is something that they do at the risk of their lives, not for multi-million-dollar endorsement deals and fame. So, you know, if you want to take a knee about somebody who got shot, I'm going to stand up for a number of people who are willing to get shot. And that's the fundamental difference between them and us.
Yeah. Scott, I'm glad Bill brought up Tiananmen Square because I think it's instructive in one way, and so much has changed in the last 30 years in another way. After Tiananmen, in which 1,000, 10,000, 20,000 Chinese were slaughtered in the streets by the People's Liberation Army, if you can stand that word in their title, we'll probably never know the true number. There was an implicit deal struck between Beijing and the rest of the country, which is, okay, we've put down the rebels. Now you sit down and shut up, but we will provide prosperity. We will provide the conditions that will make China much richer, and that's how we're going to keep our power as without having to slaughter everybody. But 30 years have passed, and China is much richer, and I don't think they can march into the streets of Hong Kong with overwhelming force and slaughter 1,000, 10,000, 20,000 people without putting at risk the international trade that has made China rich. And without that trade, you can forget about it. The whole country will erupt like Hong Kong has. So with all that in mind, could this sort of dilemma that Beijing finds itself in, could it have happened to a nicer bunch of thugs?
I think that the Chinese government is trifling with something that cannot be trifled with. And when you hear the description of Hong Kong and China as one country and two systems, or one nation and two systems, and then you hear the people who are sort of poo-pooing the protesters in Hong Kong saying, look, first of all, it was just a little extradition legislation that drove you to the streets. And secondly, China has already dialed that back and said, well, we're not going to put that into place right away. That's being held. We've taken that off the table. They've not sworn it off, but they've kind of taken it off the table for now. What's the big deal about that? I'm reminded of another situation where there was one nation and two systems, and there was just a little kind of trifling tax on tea and paper and stamps, and it wasn't really that big of a deal. It wasn't real oppression. But the people were just far enough away from the center of that system of governance to realize that there's a different kind of life out there. And they're never going back. And in fact, they've gotten so accustomed to this thing, which is called liberty, that they cannot possibly stomach the little intrusions into their lives anymore. A couple of pennies on a cup of tea? No, I'm not going to stand for it. A little tax on some paper or some stamps? Forget it. I will shoot you rather than pay for this. And I don't think that the Chinese government understands this. There is something powerful in the human heart that resonates with the song of liberty that cannot be put down except by massive destruction. And they're not willing to do that because their entire communist system of governments and their totalitarianism relies utterly on capitalism and liberty. And they can't escape the truth of that matter. So they can continue to throw their tear gas and bring out their billy clubs and try to put down those protests. But they're going to find out that liberty will rise and rise and rise again, and that ultimately the people of Hong Kong will have their freedom, as will the people on the mainland. It's only a matter of time.
Wow.
Steve, I just want to add one thing. Sorry.
Yeah.
The biggest difference in 30 years between now and Tiananmen Square is that if the Chinese were to move on the Hong Kong protesters the way they moved on those students in Tiananmen Square, you wouldn't have one smuggled image of a guy in front of a tank that got out of there on a camcorder. You would have hundreds of thousands of up close and personal views of people taking bullets and going down. And this is the only reason I bring it up is because it is the power of the image. This is why we rightfully abhor and are disgusted by the Holocaust, but we feel nothing for the gulags and the executions in the Soviet Union. There were no pictures. We didn't see film of them. We never saw people getting shot. We didn't see bodies bulldozed into a ditch. And the pictures now are the thing I think that are keeping the Chinese government under control.
You may be exactly right. And if I can backtrack for just a sec before I close this up, if you just heard Scott's answer to my question and you're a BillWhittle.com member, you just got your $10 worth for this month right there. And if you're not a member, what are you waiting for? Click over, please. With that, I'd just like to finish by saying one thing really quickly. What inspired this segment was something I came across on Facebook yesterday, which was just this brilliant meme. And it was a photograph from Hong Kong of protesters waving the American flag. Pardon me, I'm getting a little choked up over this. And it said, "Be the America that Hong Kong believes you are."
Oh, my God.
Right? So let me just conclude by saying, if America is inspiring Hong Kong, you're inspiring us right back. And that's all I need to say about that. Thank you for watching. Please click over and become a member of BillWhittle.com because content like this needs sponsors like you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.